Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on an extraordinary deep dive, one that forces us to reconcile two utterly opposite worlds.
It really is a study in contrasts.
We're taking a stack of sources, articles, intelligence briefings, detailed observations that basically transport us directly from the violent geopolitics of a turbulent Middle Eastern state to the manicured, orderly, and fiercely guarded lawns of one of England's most exclusive girls' schools.
And the contrast is not just stark, it's fundamental. The sheer, overwhelming chaos and desperation of one place, a revolution, is precisely what creates the immediate lethal peril in the other, which is, meant to be this haven of academic tranquility.
Exactly.
We are tracking a story involving a desperate political escape, a colossal fortune in missing diamonds. £750,000 worth, an amount that changes hands multiple times and drives several people to murder.
And it all lands in a school.
And a coordinated convergence of international agents right into the heart of an English boarding school.
Yeah. So that's our mission, to trace the exact journey of this unbelievable wealth, which, as you said, is literally hidden in plain sight, concealed in a totally everyday object. And in doing so, we need to uncover the precise identities of the spies, the killers, and the true complex motivations behind the chaos that erupts at Meadowbank.
It's a story of global upheaval, colliding head-on with the fiercely protected, almost sacred traditions of a British educational institution.
We need to understand not just what happened, but why this small school became the center of a geopolitical crisis. Okay, let's unpack this.
If we are going to start in what the sources call the pigeon's roost, we absolutely must begin with the imposing figure who built the roost and keeps the pigeons in order, Miss Honoria Bulstrode.
Yes.
She is the founder, the headmistress, and really the very lifeblood of Meadowbank. Her personality, her philosophy, they're the defining features of the entire institution.
And the sources, they just paint this incredible portrait of her. Meadowbank is one of the most successful and certainly one of the most expensive schools in England.
It operates entirely on her core, very blunt philosophy.
Which is?
You got what you paid for.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
She is described as tall, noble-looking, with impeccably dressed gray hair and these piercing gray eyes that, despite holding plenty of humor, also project absolute authority.
What's fascinating to me here is that she manages to balance what she sees as, necessary tradition, the rigorous academics, the importance of character, with an embracing of modern education.
She's not a stick-in-the-mud traditionalist. Not at all.
No. She's a visionary who happens to value order. But the moment she speaks, you know where the power lies. Her will is iron, and her word, as far as the school is concerned, is absolute law.
She certainly doesn't conform to the stereotype of a fussy, overly sensitive schoolmistress.
Not in the slightest. And we have the perfect anecdotal evidence of this in how she handles the parents, even the ones who are paying these enormous fees. She is completely unafraid of confrontation or applying instant, irreversible discipline.
Precisely. You just have to think of that exchange with Mrs. Hope. Mrs. Hope wants to pull her daughter out for a 6-week midterm break to the south of France. She views Meadowbank as a service she's purchasing, and therefore, she dictates the terms.
Of course.
When Miss Bulstrode refuses, Mrs. Hope insists, arguing, after all, she's my child.
And Miss Bulstrode's reply is just. It's a clinic in boundary setting. She simply acknowledges the fact. Exactly. But it's my school.
And that's it. End of discussion.
She enforces that border immediately, calmly explaining that Mrs. Hope is welcome to remove the child, but the child will not be allowed back. The education, the reputation, the structure of the school, it's all more valuable than one family's massive fee.
It speaks volumes about the scarcity and demand of a place at Meadowbank. She can afford to be that blunt because the system she built is so successful, it's self-sustaining.
But, and this is a big but beneath that confident exterior, Miss Bulstrode is struggling with a pretty profound personal conflict, which is actually a significant source of instability for the school.
That's right. She is reaching that point where she feels this intense, almost unbearable need to retire. She knows she must step away before her powers start to wane, before she begins to repeat herself or become predictable.
But the source material notes her struggle with the potential dullness of life outside Meadowbank, or maybe more accurately, the potential dullness of the school after her.
This is a classic study in the founder's dilemma, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How do you replace visionary genius with something that is merely competent? The danger is that the exciting, audacious edifice she built, based on risk and personal force, will just collapse into mediocrity once she is gone.
So she's actively searching.
She's searching for a successor who can sustain that excitement, that vision, but she's really struggling to find it among the obvious candidates, which of course brings us to the staff she's collected around her.
The staff is the real core of Meadowbank, and they represent this beautiful mix of stability and, well, emerging risk. Let's look at the old guard first. You can't discuss the history of the school without mentioning Miss Chadwick, or, as she's affectionately known, Chatty.
Miss Chadwick is the co-founder, the foundational anchor dating back to the school's very beginning. She is the comfortable, steady presence.
A brilliant mathematician, too, which really speaks to the rigorous academic standards of the place.
Right. But physically, she's described as dowdy, stooped, wearing pince-nez, unexciting, maybe, but intellectually formidable.
So she is the emotional and practical backbone. If Miss Bulstrode is the visionary, Chatty is the faithful operational officer. The sources describe her beautifully as a present help in time of trouble. What does this dual role of visionary leader and faithful co-founder tell us about the institutional psychology of Meadowbank?
It tells us that Miss Bulstrode had the necessary audacity to experiment, to innovate, to market. But Miss Chadwick provided the intellectual gravity and the emotional stability required to keep the whole system running when the vision got too far ahead of reality.
She's the foundation.
She is the essential sound foundation upon which the entire exciting enterprise was built. She represents the absolute security of the place, a quality that will, ironically, make her actions later so utterly shocking.
Okay, then we have Miss Vansittart, the assumed successor, who teaches history and German. She's competent, gracious, and as Anne Chaplin, the new secretary, assesses her perfectly, she is the glorified understudy.
She's the safe default, isn't she?
Yeah.
She is word perfect, able to recite Miss Bulstrode's philosophy and routines flawlessly. She appears to possess all the requisite skills and experience.
But
the source makes it clear she lacks that vital spark, the original pep or audacity that made Miss Bulstrode great. She represents stability and tradition, yes, but also the potential for that dull complacency Miss Bulstrode fears. She is the easiest choice, but perhaps the wrong one.
And keeping the domestic ship afloat is Miss Johnson, the matron.
Ah, yes. She is entirely focused on the harmony and maintenance of Meadowbank. Her concerns are immediate and practical room assignments, dealing with minor teenage crises, like a student whose hair oil oozed all over things, or just ensuring everyone is tucked in properly.
Her world is small and manageable.
It is. But that small, orderly world is about to be catastrophically invaded.
And the vulnerability comes less from the old guard and more from the new hires who arrive this term. This is where the outside world, the element of risk, starts to intrude.
Right. Here's where the internal tensions start to ratchet up.
First, we have Anne Chaplin, the new secretary. She looks the part, highly competent, hair like a black satin cap, extremely efficient. But her internal motivations are very different from the loyal staff.
Totally different. She views the job only as experience, admitting openly to Miss Bulstrode that she will chop and change jobs, and, crucially, that she misses the company of men.
And that detachment is her camouflage.
It is. Her competence is undeniable. She's immediately exceptional at her job, but her emotional distance is key. She tells herself she prefers being an observer, like a radio commentator, which, when you peel back the layers, is the perfect self-description for a highly effective, detached operative who is hiding in plain sight, making sure she doesn't get embroiled in anything too deeply.
Next, we have Mademoiselle Blanche, the French mistress. She's described as mousy, slender, reserved. She seems completely unremarkable.
Except for one tiny detail.
Right. The one single detail the sources give us about her is that she herself noticed everything. This quiet, almost clinical observance immediately flags her as someone who, by sheer accident of vision, could become either a critical witness, a victim, or a threat later in the game.
Her power lies in her absolute silence and comprehensive observation.
And finally, the most disruptive new staff member, the catalyst for instant staff resentment, Miss Springer, the games mistress.
Oh, she is everything the Meadowbank aesthetic is not. Bony, ginger-haired, and aggressively uncouth. She is prone to these loud lecturing pronouncements on her own excellence, announcing right there in the common room that she has a good nose for scandal and won't rest until she's pinned down my quarry.
She is trouble personified. Her loud, aggressive personality instantly makes her the object of staff gossip and resentment.
But from an analytical standpoint, it marks her as someone who is actively seeking out and will likely confront trouble. As the detective, Inspector Kelsey, later notes, she's exactly the kind of tough woman who would attempt to investigate an intruder or an oddity alone.
So her natural nosiness makes her the highest risk factor.
and subsequently the first victim of the sports pavilion. The environment is just perfectly set up. You have a core of rigid, almost fragile tradition led by a tired visionary, suddenly infiltrated by three women who are all, in their own way, observers, seekers, or agents.
Okay, so now that we have the scene set in England, to understand why this school is suddenly crawling with spies and why the stakes are so deadly high, we have to pivot. We have to examine the geopolitical crisis that provided the initial weapon, the violent revolution in the Middle Eastern state of Ramad.
Yes, and that means talking about Prince Ali Yusuf. He's only 25 years old. He is the enlightened, modern ruler. The sources paint him as a true progressive, focused on transforming his country into a functioning welfare state. Building hospitals, establishing schools, focusing on modernization and democratic principles.
But this is the tragic paradox of his rule, isn't it? His modern, welfare-focused principles backfired on him fundamentally.
They did. He's facing a violent, fatal coup because the hardline elements and extremists accuse him of being pro-Western. The sources brilliantly contrast his measured, practical rule with that of his revered grandfather, Ahmed Abdullah.
And Ahmed Abdullah was not a progressive.
Not even close. He was a cruel tyrant, known for his dramatic and violent execution of enemies. Ali Yusuf is completely perplexed as to why the people would prefer a reign of terror and brutality over sensible, successful progress. He actually asks his closest friend, Bob Rawlinson, why this is happening.
And Bob Rawlinson provides this profound, chilling answer.
He does. He says, Ahmed Abdullah, the tyrant, was dramatic and violent. He gave the people spectacle. Ali Yusuf, while decent and moral, is neither picturesque nor dramatic, and the masses often prefer the theatrical, violent certainty of a strong man, even a cruel one over the sometimes dull, complex, but ultimately beneficial process of sensible, modern governance.
That's an insight that goes way beyond Ramat. It speaks to the persistent allure of political theater over practical leadership.
It really does, and it frames the prince's dilemma perfectly. He doesn't want to run away, feeling he should stay and defend his reforms, maybe even become a martyr for his cause. But Bob Rawlinson, his pilot and friend, pushes for an immediate, highly dangerous escape.
They settle on a quick, spontaneous departure, pretending to inspect road construction from the air to avoid raising immediate alarms.
But before they execute the escape, Prince Ali Yusuf makes the critical decision regarding his private fortune. These are not state assets, but his personal jewels. The £750,000 in stones.
And he just hands them over to Bob Rawlinson.
Just like that, trusting completely in his friend's honesty and common sense to arrange their disposal.
That moment must have been overwhelming for Bob, receiving an almost unimaginable fortune right before a life-or-death flight. Ali Yusuf provides one crucial warning to his friend, a psychological insight into the stakes. Beautiful jewels drive women mad.
It's a moment that foreshadows the chaos that will follow, driven largely by feminine greed and ambition.
Ali leaves the disposal and transfer entirely up to Bob's discretion, trusting him to arrange a way to get the fortune safely out of the country if the prince doesn't survive the escape attempt.
It's an immense burden on Bob, who immediately feels miserable, carrying that enormous wealth wrapped up in his trousers pocket.
And as they anticipated, the escape plan is instantly sabotaged. The sources reveal that Ahmed, a trusted senior mechanic, had been bought off by the revolutionaries and tampered with the plane.
The wreckage is found in the inaccessible Aralas Mountains. Both Prince Ali and Bob Rawlinson are killed. The plane is destroyed, but the jewels, critically, are missing.
And that's the moment the international hunt begins in earnest. Everyone knows the fortune exists, and everyone knows Ali trusted his friend Bob to hide it.
So Bob Rawlinson, anticipating disaster, needed a courier, someone who could carry the jewels out without being noticed. He decided on his sister, Joan Sutcliffe, who was conveniently returning to England by long sea, a 6-week journey.
Which is an ideal time buffer for the political dust to settle.
Exactly. But Bob knew Joan's temperament perfectly. She was untidy, unobservant, but also prone to talking, hinting, dropping clues if she knew she was carrying a secret.
So his genius solution was that she must be the courier without knowing it.
Yes. The hiding place had to be ingenious, secure, and yet completely mundane.
He rushes to Joan's Ritz Savoy hotel room. The sources make a point of detailing the environment. It's in its usual confusion, just littered with golf clubs, film rolls, native curios, half-packed items. Bob needs a hiding place that his untidy, unobservant sister would never, ever scrutinize.
He works quickly and skillfully, relying on a small toolkit he always carried for minor repairs. And here is the touch of absurdity that defines the whole plot. He uses his young niece Jennifer's mottled red and blue plasticine, a cheap common toy, to conceal his work and seal the hiding place.
And he finishes the task, confident that nobody, especially not Jennifer, whom he mentally dismisses as a self-centered child who never saw or noticed anything outside herself, would ever observe the modification.
Then he leaves a casual, ordinary note for Joan about playing golf later, intending to throw any potential investigators off the scent, making it seem as if he had no imminent plans to depart. This was his final act of protection for his sister.
But fate, and a peculiar accident of reflection, intervenes.
It does. While Bob is working, the woman in the next room is on her balcony. She is not spying, but merely using a small mirror to inspect her chin. A moment of pure vanity.
But in the course of her self-inspection, she catches a reflection in the wardrobe mirror hanging in Joan's room and sees Bob working on something curious, manipulating an object with tools.
And that woman, we learn, is Señora Angelica de Toledo, the Spanish cabaret dancer, and the future Anne Shapland.
A highly trained operative and professional thief.
She witnesses him conceal the item, sees him leave, and knows that something incredibly valuable has just been hidden.
Her immediate reaction confirms her professional status. As soon as Bob's footsteps fade, she slips in, expertly picking the lock with nothing more than a hairpin and a knife blade. She enters, reads his casual note, the golf note, and recognizes it instantly as a decoy.
She reseals the note perfectly and begins her rapid search.
That is the moment the critical information is stolen. However, her professional timing is off by seconds. Joan and Jennifer suddenly return, packing frantically for their emergency evacuation back to England.
Angelica is forced to retreat empty-handed, but she now knows the secret. The fortune is hidden in one of Joan Sutcliffe's chaotic possessions, and she saw the item Bob manipulated. This sets the entire cat-and-mouse game in motion, leading her straight to Meadowbank, disguised as the efficient secretary Anne Shapland.
So 6 weeks after the crash, with the political chaos settling in Ramat and the jewels still missing, Meadowbank becomes the target. The intelligence groups begin to mobilize, and our sources give us a look into that initial briefing room.
We meet the key players tracking the missing wealth. First, we have Colonel Pikeway, the representative of official UK intelligence. He's deceptively unthreatening. A fat, middle-aged man who appears perpetually about to fall asleep, yet misses absolutely nothing happening in the world.
He has the full picture.
The full picture of the crash, the missing fortune, and all the geopolitical implications.
And working alongside him is Mr. Robinson, a consultant, though we deduce he is likely connected to a massive international jewel syndicate or insurance group.
Yes, he's described as fat, well-dressed, with a yellow face and melancholy dark eyes, likely not English, despite his perfect accent. He represents the financial interest group, someone whose sole mission is to recover the assets, regardless of who is in power in Ramat.
Robinson is the one who confirms that the crash was sabotage by Ahmed. And based on Rawlinson's 20 minutes spent alone in his sister's room, he deduces the jewels were concealed in Joan Sutcliffe's chaotic belongings.
So the intelligence is precise, but the location of the specific item remains unknown.
Pikeway's organization acts immediately to implement a watching brief. They dispatch Adam Goodman, who uses the nickname Ronnie, undercover to Meadowbank as a new gardener.
And his purpose is to observe Princess Shaista, Ali Yusuf's young cousin, who has conveniently just arrived at the school.
Ronnie's cover story is solid. He confirms he knows real gardening, not just superficial work. He assumes the identity of Adam Goodman.
But Pikeway also notes that other interested parties are circling the school. He mentions the existence of a Mrs. Kalinsky, who he dismisses as International Riffraff Ltd., meaning independent, opportunistic criminals.
And critically,
the unidentified cabaret dancer from Ramat, Angelica de Toledo, whom we know was already inside the gates as Anne Shapland. Meadowbank has officially become ground zero for this dangerous global chase.
the attempts to recover the jewels begin almost immediately, and the first recovery effort is a failure because the hiding place is still a mystery. We see Andrew Ball, a man employed by what is called the Gecko Lot,
A specific known gang hired for low-level, opportunistic recovery and burglary.
Right. He breaks into the Sutcliffe home in England while the family is at church.
And he absolutely ransacks Mrs. Sutcliffe's bedroom, focusing on obvious locations, jewelry boxes, hidden drawers, safes. Finds nothing.
This confirms the obvious. Bob Rawlinson's hiding place was highly unconventional and deeply secure against a routine house search.
Which leads Anne Shapland, or Angelica, to take direct action. She's already secured the secretary job by paying off Miss Bulstrode's previous secretary, to vacate the post. A perfectly professional, cold-blooded infiltration move.
She knows the jewels are hidden somewhere in Joan Sutcliffe's possessions, and she tracks down Jennifer, Joan's daughter, who has just returned to school.
Chaplin sets up the swap beautifully. She poses as a friend of Jennifer's godmother, Aunt Gina, and intercepts Jennifer near the tennis courts. She presents a brand-new, expensive racket as a gift, claiming the old one needed urgent restringing.
And Jennifer, completely entranced by the expensive gift, agrees immediately to the swap.
The motive is clear and chillingly efficient. Chaplin, remembering the reflection in the wardrobe mirror, knows the item Bob Rawlinson worked on was a sport-related item, likely a racket, and she needs to get the original back to examine its handle.
But here's the massive, critical moment of pure, unpredictable chance that absolutely foils the highly professional agent.
It's just incredible. Jennifer and her soul friend, Julia Upjohn, had already swapped rackets a few days prior.
Just a casual swap between friends.
That's a casual swap. Julia wanted Jennifer's restrung racket, and Jennifer, being flighty and self-centered, agreed.
So Anne Chaplin unwittingly takes Julia's old, slightly worn but recently restrung racket.
Exactly. The jewel-filled racket, Bob Rawlinson's true hiding place, is still at the school, now bearing Julia Upjohn's name tape. Chaplin dismisses this remaining racket as worthless junk, assuming she has retrieved the correct, modified item.
It's an accidental misdirection of epic proportions. The entire international espionage network, which relied on the skill and precision of agents like Chaplin, is derailed by the sheer random chance of two schoolgirls making an impulsive swap.
It just proves that human variables are the biggest wild card in any perfectly planned criminal operation.
Julia, the real carrier of the fortune, is later puzzled by the bizarre exchange, describing it perfectly to her friend. It's like new lamps for old, Aladdin, you know.
And that offhand, simple observation is the piece of psychological evidence that will eventually provide Poirot with the key to the entire mystery long after the professionals have failed.
With Anne Chaplin foiled, but still believing she possesses the jewels, Meadowbank erupts into violence. The location of the subsequent murders, the new, highly modern sports pavilion situated near the squash courts and drying room, is a constant puzzle for the local police, particularly Detective Inspector Kelsey.
He just can't figure it out. Why such an unusual setting?
The first victim is Miss Springer, the loud, aggressively nosy games mistress. She is shot dead. Inspector Kelsey is baffled. The pavilion seems completely unrelated to international intrigue.
But we know Miss Springer had a good nose for scandal and a proprietary attitude towards that specific building. It's highly likely that she, in her characteristic aggressive fashion, stumbled upon the connection between the pavilion and the secret.
Maybe she saw Chaplin there.
Perhaps she saw Chaplin, Angelica, attempting to access or hide something there, or meeting someone. She had already accosted Mademoiselle Blanche there, suggesting she was constantly asserting her territory.
And Chaplin, the secretary, clearly had the motive. She was in a highly pressured infiltration position. She had just been foiled by the racket swap, and she could not afford to have Miss Springer, with her good nose, expose her presence or her true purpose.
So Springer becomes the first casualty, eliminated for simply getting too close to the operative, if not the jewels themselves.
The immediate reaction to the murder is then compounded by the spectacular, deliberate misdirection of the faux kidnapping of Princess Shasta.
A plan that had been months in the making. On the Sunday parents are allowed to visit, a fraudulent car arrives earlier than the genuine one meant to retrieve her. Shasta gets in and is staged for her escape to Geneva.
And Poirot later clarifies the genius of this misdirection. The girl at the school was actually a young French actress who specializes in playing schoolgirl parts.
Right. She had been sent in weeks earlier specifically to masquerade as the princess. The real Shasta was already safe in a Swiss chalet.
So this kidnapping was just a well-timed extraction designed to achieve two things. First, securing the actress's safety, and second, shifting the intense police and intelligence focus away from the missing fortune and onto a high-profile political kidnapping.
And it was effective. It immediately drew attention away from the subtle internal chaos caused by the hunt for the jewels. The police were thrown completely off balance, convinced the danger was external, focused on political ransom.
Not internal, focused on greed.
Exactly.
But the violence continues despite the police focus elsewhere. Later that same night, Miss Chadwick sees a light on in the pavilion and goes to investigate.
The anchor of the school, the loyal co-founder, putting herself at risk.
When she arrives, she finds Miss Vansittart dead from a blow to the head. A professional, silent method, suggesting she was hit by someone who knew exactly how to deliver a fatal strike without noise or struggle.
This murder is the most confusing one for the police. Vansittart was the epitome of safe, unexciting continuity. She had no geopolitical connections. The police assumed she stumbled upon Springer's killer, but the silent, calculated nature of her death suggests she was a deliberate target, linked directly to the tensions within the school administration itself.
And finally, we have the third victim, Mademoiselle Blanche, the quiet French mistress who noticed everything. She makes the critical error of trying to profit from her observations.
She tries to leverage what she saw or suspected, specifically mentioning her observation of Miss Springer's proprietary attitude toward the sports pavilion and perhaps seeing Chaplin lurking there.
She attempts to blackmail the killer.
Yes, she calls and demands payment be deposited into a Maison Blanche account. She is killed brutally and silently in her own room by a sandbag, a heavy, silent weapon that suggests intimacy and an intent to conceal the murder method.
So the logical deduction is that she was blackmailing the person responsible for the most recent murder, or perhaps the one she saw in the pavilion. The environment of Meadowbank has just completely dissolved into a hunting ground, fueled by a massive fortune, professional greed, and deep institutional resentment.
And amidst this chaos, the least likely person to solve the mystery does so. Young Julia Upjohn.
She connects the dots based on the strange racket swap and that new lamps for old comment. Despite all the violence, her mind is working on the logic of the swap.
She's sent home by her panicked mother, but she knows the jewel-filled racket must be the one she still owns. She realizes the old, worn racket must have been the key, not the new one. She meticulously examines the handle of her old racket, the one that had previously belonged to Jennifer and was modified by Bob Rawlinson.
The sources detail the discovery beautifully. She uses a tool, likely a nail file or a knife, and carefully pries open the handle. She finds that the wood was indeed hollowed out and plugged with that distinctive, mottled red and blue substance.
The plasticine Bob used to conceal his work.
Right. And inside, wrapped securely in a plastic sponge bag, she finds the staggering fortune. The packet of glittering, real stones.
It's the culmination of the entire chase. The immense wealth sought by international intelligence and killers was hidden inside a cheap plasticine plug in a standard tennis racket handle, carried casually by a schoolgirl for weeks.
Julia exhibits unbelievable courage and presence of mind. She immediately hides the gems beneath her mattress using adhesive plaster.
And when someone tries her door later that night, clearly the killer, either Chaplin or an accomplice, looking for the jewels, Julia's alert, terrified, but stays silent and undetected.
Her next move is perhaps the most audacious of the entire story. Knowing the school is shut down, chaotic, and crawling with potentially dangerous people, she doesn't trust the local authorities.
So she climbs over the grounds wall, takes a train to London, and acts on instinct to consult the one person she trusts to handle complex international mysteries. Hercule Poirot, a friend of her, Aunt Maureen. She just hands him the fortune.
With the jewels secured and the violence contained, Poirot arrives to deliver his elegant synthesis. He's already aware of the situation from the chief constable and the intelligence briefings, but his investigation focuses not on ballistics or fingerprints, but on the overlooked human details.
Poirot's methodology is key here. He focuses on the psychological inconsistencies. Why did Jennifer fail to recognize Anne Chaplin from a sketch? Because, as Bob Rawlinson had correctly assessed, Jennifer was so self-centered and focused on the new racket that she barely registered the woman who gave it to her.
Her self-absorption created a perfect memory block.
Exactly. He also focuses on the seemingly irrelevant details, such as the fact that Mrs. Upjohn had this astonishing reaction upon first seeing the staff when she visited her daughter. Miss Bulstrode had noticed it, but dismissed it as parental anxiety.
But Poirot realized Mrs. Upjohn must have recognized someone extremely familiar.
He methodically confirms the layers of deception. He confirms the false Princess Shasta plot with the French actress, and details the failed attempts by various international syndicates to recover the jewels. He deduces that the jewels' hiding place was ultimately disclosed not by deep espionage, but by sheer coincidence and an act of casual vanity, Anne Chaplin's lucky vantage point at the Ritz Savoy Hotel.
So if the jewels are found, and the confusion surrounding the multiple victims remains, what is the sequence of events and who is responsible for the murders? This is where Poirot's elegant logic leads to the revelation of not one, but two entirely separate killers operating within the same academic bubble.
The time comes for the confrontation. Mrs. Upjohn, having been located by Poirot's people in Anatolia, traveling by bus, no less. is immediately flown back.
She's brought into the meeting with the remaining Meadowbank staff and Miss Bulstrode. She has time only for a quick, nervous tidy-up before walking into the staff room.
And the moment she enters, her anxiety just evaporates, replaced by cold certainty. She walks across the room and identifies the quiet, efficient secretary, Anne Shapland.
She identifies her as her former wartime counter-espionage contact, the unbelievably dangerous killer, Angelica, the Spanish cabaret dancer who occupied the room next to Joan Sutcliffe in Rumot.
Mrs. Upjohn confirms they had warned then that Angelica was a cold-blooded killer and one of the most ruthless agents they had encountered during the war. Her identity as the detached, efficient secretary was the perfect, highly professional cover.
So the secretary's earlier dismissal of her tendency to chop and change jobs as boredom is instantly revealed as a massive, world-spanning lie.
Anne Shapland, exposed, confirms the greed. She admits she paid the previous secretary to vacate the post so she could infiltrate the school and retrieve what she saw Bob Rawlinson hide. She is the professional agent of fortune driven purely by the prospect of that £250,000 score.
And Shapland reacts instantly and violently to the exposure, pulling out a small, wicked-looking automatic and pointing it straight at Mrs. Upjohn to silence the witness.
She is the professional killer, responsible for the deaths linked to the hunt for the fortune. Miss Springer, who was nosing around the sports pavilion and getting too close to Shapland's operation.
And Mademoiselle Blanche, whom she killed silently with the sandbag after Blanche tried to blackmail her based on what she saw.
It's a spectacular expose.
Oh.
The most unassuming, neat, and detached person in the room, the efficient secretary, was the professional cat among the pigeons, the cold, calculating operative.
But this doesn't explain everything.
No. Poirot pauses the drama here. He secures Anne Shapland, but he then turns to the staff and says, as the sources note, this raises an important question. If Anne Shapland killed Springer and Blanche, who killed Miss Vansittart?
And the timeline confirms the confusion. Shapland had a watertight alibi for the time of Vansittart's murder, having been at a London nightclub with her fiancé, Dennis Rathbone. The police had completely failed to find any connection between Vansittart and the international intrigue. She was the safe, traditional candidate.
The revelation that follows is perhaps the most shocking and heartbreaking moment of the entire deep dive. The murderer of Miss Vansittart was Miss Chadwick, the loyal co-founder, Chatty, the anchor and stabilizing force of the institution.
This was a murder driven by an entirely different, intensely personal motivation.
It was. It was driven by protective, jealous loyalty to Meadowbank and to Miss Bulstrode's original audacious vision. Miss Chadwick, the quiet mathematician, was horrified that Miss Bulstrode was considering appointing Miss Vansittart, the unimaginative, safe, word-perfect copy who represented predictable mediocrity, as the successor.
Chatty believed Vansittart would ruin the school by adhering too strictly to old tradition, allowing the exciting, visionary edifice Miss Bulstrode had built to lapse into dull complacency.
In Chadwick's mind, Meadowbank was too important, too vital to be entrusted to safe hands. Vansittart's death was a desperate act of preservation, ensuring the school would be forced to seek a more imaginative, visionary successor.
The ultimate dramatic climax occurs moments after Poirot reveals the truth about Shapland. As Anne Shapland fires her desperate shot at Mrs. Upjohn, a final act of professional malice, Miss Chadwick, despite her age and small stature, reacts instinctively.
She throws herself in front of the one person she truly loved and served, Miss Bulstrode, absorbing the shot intended for the headmistress.
And in her final, dying moments, Miss Chadwick confesses the murder of Vansittart to Miss Bulstrode. Eleanor, it was me! Jealous. I wanted...
The word jealous meant she was jealous, not of Bulstrode's success, but of Vansittart's impending succession, which she viewed as a betrayal of their shared vision. It is the perfect narrative conclusion for her character. Murder driven not by professional greed, but by passionate, institutional, protective love.
The violence and the shocking truth bring Miss Bulstrode the profound clarity she had been lacking about the school's future and her own retirement. She realizes her choice of Vansittart, driven by adherence to tradition, had been completely wrong.
She recognizes that she, too, was becoming complacent and bored in her search for the safe choice.
So she approaches Eileen Ridge, who had been away sick the previous term, but whom Poirot identified as being in Rumot during the crisis, though innocent of any crime. Miss Bulstrode offers her a partnership.
And she explicitly values Ridge's vision and willingness to take a risk, the very qualities she herself possessed, over Vansittart's safe adherence to tradition.
Miss Bulstrode notes the distinction. While old men dream dreams, young men have visions. Meadowbank needs a young woman with vision, someone willing to push boundaries and not simply copy the past.
The institutional crisis forced the founder to embrace risk again, securing the future vitality of the school.
Meanwhile, the fate of the jewels is resolved elegantly. Mr. Robinson, the syndicate consultant, tracks down Alice Calder, Prince Ali Yusuf's secret, legally married English wife, and their olive-skinned son, Alan, named after Ali.
Right. Ali had married her in England, ensuring Alan was legitimate, though he knew he would eventually have to return to Ramat and take an acceptable political wife.
So Mr. Robinson sells the fortune, securing a staggering £500,000 trust fund for Alice and Alan. This action completes Ali's final, profound wish to protect his family and ensure their financial security outside of the political turmoil of Ramat.
And Alice Calder, facing the overwhelming reality of being a very rich woman and instantly attracting sharks and confidence tricksters, handles the wealth with grace. She insists that young Julia Upjohn receives 1 stone for her bravery, ingenuity, and role in discovering the fortune, a brilliant emerald which she calls green for mystery.
But the truly defining moment comes at the very end of the resolution, and it speaks directly to the moral cost of the fortune. When Mr. Robinson asks Alice if she will keep just 1 stone as a keepsake, she refuses.
Absolutely. She cites a Bible passage that Ali had shared with her about a woman whose price was above rubies.
It's a powerful, culminating thought. After all the greed, the violence, the death caused by the chase for this wealth, Alice chooses to completely reject the physical symbols of that chaos. She demonstrates that the true, unshakable value in life, loyalty, family, personal integrity, is literally worth more than the fortune itself.
What's fascinating here is how the seemingly dull backdrop, a girls' school run entirely on strict routine and tradition, became the absolute focal point for massive international violence and greed driven by 2 entirely distinct forces.
You had the professional, cold-blooded opportunism of Anne Chaplin.
And the intense, deeply personal, protective love for an institution that drove Miss Chadwick to murder.
Meadowbank survived the ordeal, but only by recognizing that its salvation lay in embracing risk and new vision, rather than falling back on safe, predictable tradition.
The sources close on that final provocative thought from Alice Calder, who valued a woman whose price was above rubies. After witnessing the entire cataclysm caused by the pursuit of wealth, was the one thing in your life, that principle, that relationship, that conviction, you would absolutely refuse to trade for a fortune? That is something worth pondering long after the crisis in the sports pavilion is over.